The rebel is one of the most prevalent, intriguing, and important figures in the world. From time immemorial, rebels have been the catalyst for change, defying authority, challenging established norms, and pushing beyond the boundaries of conventional thought. From childhood, we are taught to obey, to blend in, to follow the path laid before us. But deep within, the rebel whispers. Have you ever felt it? That quiet voice telling you that something is wrong, that you were meant for more than this, that the world is not as it should be. This is the inner rebel calling. They embody our deepest yearning for authenticity, for freedom, for a life unshackled by expectation. The rebel is not just a person, it is an energy, an archetype embedded deep within the human psyche. It whispers to those who dare to listen, urging them to break the chains of conformity. History is written by those who obey, but it is shaped by those who rebel. Whether it's Prometheus stealing fire from the gods or Lucifer's defiance of heaven, from political revolutionaries to artists who break conventions, the rebel archetype exists across every culture and every age. These figures stand in opposition to societal norms, often becoming catalysts for profound change. By pushing the limits of accepted thought, they create a ripple effect that can transform the course of history. To rebel is to risk exile, pain, and even annihilation, but without it, there is no progress. The question is, are you willing to pay the price? This is captured in Greek mythology, where even Odin, the All-Father, sacrificed himself to himself, hanging from Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 days and nights to obtain wisdom. The theme repeats across cultures, rebellion as a gateway to transformation, but also to suffering. Every great revolution begins with a rebel, the misfit, the outlaw, the troublemaker. Society fears them, yet admires them. They break rules and push the boundaries of what is possible. From ancient times to modern revolutions, the rebel has shaped the world. They are the ones who defy authority, not merely for the sake of defiance, but because something within them refuses to accept the world as it is. Men from all ages are conditioned to obey, to conform, to blend in. Society rewards compliance and punishes deviation. But within you, there is a repressed voice, a whisper that tells you something is wrong, that you were meant for more. It's not a stretch to describe all the godlike figures to walk on earth as embodying the figure of the rebel archetype: Jesus Christ, Prophet Muhammad, Confucius, Moses, the Buddha. These figures, whether seen as good or bad, became the greatest source of evolution during their time. Rebels have shaped the world in all ways, toppling oppressive regimes, igniting revolutions, and changing the course of human thought. Yet they have also been the catalysts of destruction, chaos, and suffering. The rebel archetype walks a fine line between liberation and anarchy, between courage and recklessness. They have been seen as both heroes and villains, liberators and destroyers. Understanding the rebel archetype means understanding its shadow, the trickster. The rebel and the trickster often walk the same path, but their destinations differ. While both challenge authority, the trickster does so through deception, cunning, and playful subversion. He is usually driven by mischief, wit, or a desire to outsmart others, often for personal gain, amusement, or to expose hypocrisy, and many times ends up harming the people around him. The trickster thrives on chaos but often lacks a clear moral compass, acting out of self-interest or mischief. Think of the trickster archetype, the inner force that pushes you to disrupt, deceive, and manipulate. Your inner trickster only seeks to satisfy your superiority without any proper cause. It is therefore wise of any man to not allow this figure too much space in their lives. In contrast, rebels are motivated by a sense of injustice, a desire to change or overthrow existing systems, rules, or authority. Just like the id, the unconscious, instinctual component that is present at birth, the source of instant gratification, bodily needs and wants, emotional impulses, and drives, the rebel is in constant conflict with the superego, the internalization of cultural rules, which helps us act in socially acceptable ways. The rebel challenges the status quo, often seeking deeper societal or political change. Both the trickster and the rebel archetypes can be found in myths and folklore across cultures and traditions. Examples of the trickster in popular culture include Loki in Norse mythology, Coyote in Native American traditions, and Hermes in Greek mythology. These figures use deceit, illusion, and cleverness to manipulate reality. sometimes to teach lessons and other times for selfish gain. One famous myth that encompasses the total nature of the trickster archetype is about Hermes' theft of his older brother Apollo's cattle. According to legend, shortly after birth, Hermes secretly left his home and hid the cattle of Apollo, the god of the sun. To ensure the cattle would not leave tracks, he made each one a set of 4 boots. Hermes then went back into his home without alerting his mother. Of course, when questioned by Apollo, Hermes acted innocently. However, Apollo didn't believe the youth and proceeded to take him to Zeus. Instead of punishing Hermes, Zeus laughed at the whole affair. Recognizing the cunning and speed required to accomplish the cattle theft, he made Hermes the messenger of the gods. Hermes also helped his father, Zeus. In one famous incident, Zeus, known for his marital indiscretions, fell in love with a mortal woman named Io. When Zeus's wife, Hera, learned of their affair, she turned Io into a cow and ordered a giant named Argus to stand watch over her. Argus was described as having hundreds of eyes covering his body. This presented a problem because the giant could leave some eyes open while he slept. Zeus enlisted the help of Hermes, who used his magic staff to put all of Argus's eyes to sleep. Hermes then killed the giant. Characters like the Joker also portray the full nature of the trickster archetype in modern culture. The rebel archetype, on the other hand, is seen in the figures of Prometheus, the titan who defied Zeus, stole fire from the gods, and gifted it to mankind. For his defiance, Zeus chained him to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, where an eagle would come and eat his liver. The liver would then regenerate overnight so that the eagle could continue to torture Prometheus for eternity. Yet, without his rebellion, humanity would have remained in darkness. In more recent history, figures like Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela used rebellion not to destroy, but to build. Their defiance against oppressive systems led to the liberation of millions. The rebel, whether seen as misguided or visionary, continues to stir the pot of human experience, sometimes shaking the foundations of established beliefs. Their audacity to confront the status quo is a timeless source of both humor and shock, painting a picture of defiance that resonates through the ages. All of us are bound to suffer from the absence of the rebel archetype in our lives. Frenetic and upright, we make our lives so hard by trying to thrive in a world that promotes conformity, authoritarianism, and mass psychosis, that we might as well be slaves to the designated leaders. As Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Society everywhere is in conspiracy against the manhood of every one of its members. The virtue in most request is conformity. Self-reliance and nonconformity are its aversions." Forgetting that individuality is a basic human nature, we wonder why we so easily become miserable and unhappy from sticking to the beaten path of the many. The antidote to this would be to give the rebel archetype some space in our lives. Carl Jung was the first to describe the rebel as an archetype. The rebel, like all archetypes, is not part of a mechanical system, but a piece of life itself. Archetypes are images integrally connected to the living individual by the bridge of emotions, a universal, inherited pattern of behavior or symbol that resonates across cultures. This resonance stems from its numinous nature, a quality that captivates and stirs our emotions. However, aligning oneself too closely with these archetypes can lead to psychological imbalance, often resulting in ego inflation. This state occurs when one's sense of identity becomes disproportionately amplified, fostering delusions of grandeur, megalomania, and ultimately self-destruction. Archetypes operate on a primal level, closely tied to instinct rather than ethical or moral concerns. The role of the human ego is to temper these archetypal forces with a sense of moral responsibility. This task is crucial not only for our internal balance, but also for maintaining harmony in the external world. Carl Jung highlighted this challenge, stating, "The images of the unconscious place a great responsibility upon a man. Failure to understand them, or a shirking of ethical responsibility, deprives him of his wholeness and imposes a painful fragmentariness on his life." Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming one's true self, requires integrating all aspects of our psyche, including the rebel. The goal is not to suppress rebellion, but to channel it constructively. The rebel archetype represents a dynamic force in the psyche that drives a person toward the realization of their individuality and against restrictive social norms. This impulse can manifest constructively, as in the case of leaders of social movements, such as General Nabopolassar, who led the Neo-Babylonian Empire during the Revolt of Babylon in 626 BC. He continuously fought wars of independence until he successfully consolidated control of Babylonia in 620 BC, defeating the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which had ruled Babylonia for more than a century. Conversely, this impulse can also manifest destructively in individuals who reject and rebel against all forms of authority without discernment. One such figure was a simple farmer from India who transformed into something far more dangerous, a legend feared by some and worshipped by others. Between 1939 and 1954, his name became synonymous with both terror and justice. With over 1,200 robberies, 185 murders, and 90 police encounters, including the killing of 32 officers, he was India's most notorious dacoit. And yet in his village, he is not remembered as a criminal. He is worshipped as a god. Why? Because he didn't kill for greed. He didn't rob for power. He waged war against the landlords and moneylenders who preyed upon the poor. To his people, he was not a bandit. He was a savior. His reign of defiance was so unstoppable that it wasn't the police who finally took him down. It was the Indian army, under direct orders from the Prime Minister himself. A Gurkha captain, Babar Singh Thapa, was sent to hunt him, and with his death, an era of rebellion ended. The rebel archetype has manifested itself in various cultures and eras, taking different forms but always maintaining its essence of defiance against the status quo. In literature and art, rebels have been portrayed as both heroes and anti-heroes, reflecting the complexity of this archetype. The rebel is neither wholly virtuous nor wholly corrupt. It is a double-edged sword, wielded by those who seek freedom and those who bring destruction. The word rebel derives from the Latin rebellus, which means to revolt. Rebellus is a combination of the Latin words re, meaning back, and bellare, meaning to wage war. Together they mean back to wage war. Society seeks conformity. It molds individuals into obedient followers, suppressing the fire of defiance before it can spark into something uncontrollable. We have been conditioned to believe that rebellion is dangerous, that it is reckless, that it is foolish. But what if the greatest danger is obedience? What if the true tragedy is not the rebel who risks everything for change, but the man who lives his entire life in quiet submission, never daring to question, never daring to act? On a psychological level, the rebel embodies the innate human desire for autonomy, a primal resistance against forces that seek to control and suppress. Throughout history, rebels have risen not merely as outlaws, but as symbols of defiance, challenging systems that strip people of their freedom. To get a clearer image of the rebel archetype, we must trace its origins across different cultures, exploring the myths, philosophies, and histories that have immortalized the spirit of defiance. Throughout mythology, the rebel is a recurring figure. This archetype is seen as a symbol of transformation and chaos. In Greek mythology, Arachne was a talented mortal weaver, so talented, in fact, that her skill was comparable to that of Athena, the goddess of wisdom and craft. And Arachne knew it. She was not afraid to point this out. One day, an old woman came to Arachne, warning her to stop comparing herself to the gods and offering forgiveness if she ceased. But Arachne remained defiant, claiming that she spoke only the truth and that Athena should challenge her herself if she thought otherwise. At once, the old woman threw off her disguise to reveal herself as none other than the goddess Athena. However, Arachne stood her ground and, true to her word, challenged Athena to a weaving contest. Arachne's contest proved to be her bravest act of blasphemy. Not only did she produce a piece of weaving that was, in fact, better than Athena's, but she also used her skills to depict the gods as she truly saw them. While Athena's piece portrayed the gods as noble and proud rulers of Olympus, Arachne depicted them as drunken fools abusing mortals, including Zeus's hideous treatment of women. In a rage of jealousy and humiliation, Athena tore up Arachne's work, beat her with a weaving shuttle, and turned her into a spider. Similarly, in Hindu mythology, the Asuras, demonic beings, frequently challenged the Devas, celestial beings, representing a cosmic struggle between order and defiance. Yet in some interpretations, these so-called demons are not inherently evil. They are forces that question the divine status quo. The story of Ravana, the ten-headed king of Lanka, exemplifies this. Though often portrayed as a villain, Ravana was also a learned scholar and a devoted follower of Shiva. His defiance, though destructive, was born of immense knowledge and ambition. The rebel archetype is neither good nor evil. It is a force, one that can liberate or destroy. The question is not whether rebellion is necessary, but rather what we choose to rebel against and why. In Norse mythology, Loki, the trickster god, embodies the paradox of rebellion. He is both a catalyst for change and a harbinger of chaos. His actions often lead to both ruin and revelation, highlighting the unpredictable nature of defiance. The gods rely on him even as they fear him, illustrating the duality of rebellion. It is necessary for growth but dangerous if left unchecked. Beyond mythology, rebellion has played a crucial role in shaping societies. In ancient Egypt, the reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten, 1353 to 1336 BCE, stands as an example of ideological rebellion. He abolished the traditional Egyptian pantheon and established monotheism, worshipping only the sun god, Aten. His radical reforms defied millennia of religious tradition, and after his death, his successors erased his legacy, returning Egypt to its former ways. Akhenaten's story highlights a recurring theme in history. Rebels often face resistance not only from rulers but from the very people they seek to change. In China, the philosophy of Taoism offers a unique perspective on rebellion. Laozi, the founder of Taoism, taught that true power lies in yielding, in embracing the flow of nature rather than forcibly opposing it. Yet Taoism itself became a form of quiet rebellion against Confucianism, which emphasized strict societal order. The Yellow Turban Rebellion, 184 CE, inspired by Taoist ideals, sought to overthrow the corrupt Han dynasty, illustrating how even philosophies that advocate passivity can give birth to revolutions. Some of history's most influential figures were rebels, not in the sense of warriors, but in their defiance of intellectual and moral norms. Socrates, one of the founding figures of Western philosophy, was condemned to death for corrupting the youth of Athens and questioning the gods. His method of relentless questioning, the Socratic method, was a form of rebellion against dogma. His refusal to flee his execution cemented his legacy as a martyr of free thought. In contrast, Spartacus, a Thracian gladiator, led one of the most famous slave revolts against the Roman Republic, 73 to 71 BCE. Unlike Socrates, his rebellion was not philosophical but physical. He challenged the might of Rome, inspiring generations with his defiance. His movement, though ultimately crushed, exposed the brutal realities of slavery and planted the seeds of resistance that would echo through history. While the West often views rebellion in terms of external conflict, Eastern traditions frame it as an internal struggle. In Buddhism, the greatest battle is not against rulers or systems, but against the ego and the illusions of the mind. The concept of Mara represents the forces that bind individuals to suffering, desires, fears, and attachments. The Buddha's enlightenment was, in essence, a rebellion against these inner chains. His defiance was not loud or violent, but silent and transformative. Similarly, in Zen philosophy, the idea of killing the Buddha is a radical metaphor for spiritual rebellion. It suggests that one must transcend even the highest teachings to reach true understanding. This form of defiance is not about destruction, but about breaking free from dogma to experience reality directly. In more recent history, figures like Thomas Clarkson and Granville Sharp were rebels who fought to end slavery. In 1787, they established the Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade, whose purpose was to campaign for the slave trade to be brought to an end. Rebellion follows a cyclical pattern in history. The oppressed rise against the oppressor, new leaders emerge, and over time, they become the very forces they once fought against. The French Revolution, 1789 to 1799, is a prime example. It began as a revolt against monarchy and tyranny, but soon descended into the Reign of Terror, where the revolutionaries became executioners. The Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, 1917, followed a similar trajectory. What started as a fight for workers' rights led to Stalin's oppressive regime. These cycles reveal an uncomfortable truth. Rebellion alone is not enough. Without wisdom and self-awareness, the revolutionary can become the tyrant. As Carl Jung observed, what you resist persists. the unexamined rebel risks recreating the very structures they sought to dismantle. Rebellion is a force of nature embedded in the psyche, shaping the way individuals and societies react to authority. Every age has its rebels, and every civilization has faced its own crises of defiance. Whether through mythology, philosophy, or history, the spirit of rebellion endures, shaping human consciousness and society alike. Yet the challenge remains: how does one rebel without becoming a slave to rebellion itself? The emergence of the rebel has occurred internally throughout our lives and externally throughout history as a response to oppression and suppression, but its expression varies based on the psychological landscape of the time. Carl Jung's exploration of mass psychosis and authoritarianism sheds light on the mechanisms that drive entire populations to accept or resist authority, revealing the dangers of collective delusion and the need for individual sovereignty. Mass psychosis occurs when a large portion of society loses its ability to think critically, succumbing to fear, propaganda, and groupthink. In such states, people become susceptible to the dictates of authoritarian leaders who promise security at the cost of freedom. This phenomenon is evident in historical regimes, where masses were manipulated into submission through coercion, misinformation, and psychological conditioning. Jung emphasized the role of the unconscious in shaping collective movements. When individuals suppress their own inner conflicts, they project their fears onto external entities, creating enemies that justify oppression and control. The rise of totalitarian states often follows this psychological blueprint. An external threat is manufactured, an authoritarian figure emerges as the solution, and the masses, gripped by fear, surrender their autonomy in exchange for the illusion of safety. When a ruling elite becomes possessed by a political ideology, whether it be communism, fascism, or technocracy, the next step is to induce a population into accepting their rule by infecting them with the collective psychosis of totalitarianism. As Mirlu explains, this psychosis is simply a question of reorganizing and manipulating collective feelings in the proper way. The general method by which the members of a ruling elite accomplish this is through menticide, the killing of the mind. Menticide is a crime against the human mind and spirit, but is always systematized anew. It is an organized system of psychological intervention and judicial perversion through which a ruling class can imprint their own opportunistic thoughts upon the minds of those they plan to use and destroy. Priming a population for the crime of menticide begins with the sowing of fear. When individuals are flooded with negative emotions, such as fear or anxiety, they become highly susceptible to descending into delusions. Real, imagined, or fabricated threats can be used to instill fear, but an especially effective technique is to use waves of terror. Under this method, fear is staggered with periods of calm, but each lull is followed by an even more intense spell of terror. As Mirlu states, each wave of terrorizing creates its effects more easily after a breathing spell than the one that preceded it, because people are still disturbed by their previous experience. This dynamic can be seen in countless historical events: the witch hunts of the Middle Ages, the rise of fascist regimes in the 20th century, and even the mass ideological conformity of modern times all reveal the susceptibility of the collective psyche to manipulation. As Jung warned, the bigger the crowd, the more negligible the individual. When people lose their sense of individuality, they become part of a faceless mass, willing to obey without question. According to Jung, one can only return sanity to an insane world by first giving the rebel archetype some space in their consciousness, without allowing it to take complete control, and living in a way that inspires others. As he puts it, "It is not for nothing that our age cries out for the Redeemer personality, for the one who can emancipate himself from the grip of the collective psychosis and save at least his own soul." Authoritarianism thrives on submission, but rebellion is its counterforce. The true rebel is not just an outward force against tyranny, but an inward force against psychological enslavement. To resist mass psychosis, one must cultivate inner sovereignty, critical thinking, and the courage to stand alone if necessary. The thinkers who challenge dogma, the scientists who questioned prevailing theories, and the philosophers who resisted ideological coercion all embody the psychological rebel archetype. Their resistance was not rooted in ego or destruction, but in the pursuit of truth and freedom. Jung's analysis warns us that the choice to rebel wisely or to conform blindly determines the course of both individual lives and entire civilizations. Every person reaches a moment in their life where they must let be of their rebellious nature and break away from outdated beliefs, societal conditioning, or self-destructive habits. This inner rebellion is necessary for true self-discovery. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming one's authentic self by separating from imposed identities. Without this, a person risks stagnation, forever living under the expectations of others instead of carving their own destiny. Take the story of the Buddha. Siddhartha Gautama was born into a life of luxury, shielded from suffering. But once he saw the realities of pain and death, he rebelled. He abandoned his palace, wealth, and titles to seek enlightenment. His story teaches that true transformation requires the courage to defy comfort and embrace the unknown. Each act of self-liberation echoes the great mythological narratives of defiance, reminding us that growth is impossible without conflict. But rebellion without purpose leads to chaos. Jung warned, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them." True inner rebellion demands self-awareness, discipline, and direction. One must not rebel just for the sake of resisting, but to create something better. Like Prometheus stealing fire to give humanity knowledge, rebellion should illuminate, not destroy. However, breaking free is not easy. Society discourages deviation from the norm. From childhood, we are conditioned to obey rules, follow a structured life, and fear failure. Fear of judgment and exile keeps people locked in lives they don't want. This explains why so many experience a midlife crisis, a moment when they realize they have been living for others instead of themselves. This tension is cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort that arises when a person's actions contradict their inner truth. Many suppress this discomfort, choosing security over self-discovery, but those who confront it undergo radical transformation. History is filled with figures who embodied personal rebellion. Nikola Tesla, ridiculed for his unconventional ideas, defied the scientific community to pioneer electrical engineering. Galileo Galilei, despite being forced to recant under threat of execution, remained loyal to his truth, revolutionizing science. Frida Kahlo defied societal norms by embracing her unique artistic style and unconventional lifestyle. Jung gives a clue. No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. This means true rebellion requires confronting one's own darkness, fears, insecurities, and suppressed desires. Only by understanding these forces can a person rebel constructively. The unconscious rebel burns bridges, but the conscious rebel builds new ones toward wisdom. Moreover, rebellion is not a solo journey. Just as historical revolutionaries found strength in collective movements, personal rebellion often requires guidance. A wise rebel does not act out of resentment, but from a deep yearning for truth. Rebellion is woven into the fabric of human existence. It shapes civilizations and individuals alike. The challenge is not whether to rebel, but when and how. Should we conform or carve our own path? Should we cling to safety or embrace uncertainty? When rebellion is tempered with wisdom, it becomes a force for transformation. If you feel stuck in life, ask yourself, what do I need to rebel against? To walk the path of the rebel is to embrace an existence filled with both clarity and suffering, purpose and exile. History remembers rebels as symbols of change, but what often goes unnoticed is the heavy toll of defying the world. To stand against the tide means to stand alone, at least for a time. Yet, to suppress the rebel within is to deny a fundamental part of the psyche. The rebel archetype is not just about defying authority. It is the force within us that questions, challenges, and seeks authenticity. Without it, one risks falling into blind obedience, living a life dictated by external forces rather than inner truth. Most people do not question the way things are. They move within the system, not against it. But the rebel sees beyond the surface. They notice the contradictions, the illusions, the chains disguised as freedom. And once you see, you cannot unsee. But this heightened awareness comes at a cost: isolation. Society does not take kindly to those who expose its flaws. Rebels are labeled as dangerous, unstable, or misguided. Even when their ideas are proven right, they are often celebrated too late. only after they have suffered rejection, ridicule, or worse. Think of Giordano Bruno, who dared to suggest an infinite universe beyond Earth and was burned at the stake for it. Or Friedrich Nietzsche, whose radical ideas on morality and power were ridiculed in his time, only to shape modern philosophy after his death. To question reality is to risk becoming an outcast. Consider the alternative: to ignore the rebel within, to silence the questions that stir in the depths of the mind, to conform even when something inside screams against it. Suppressing the rebel archetype does not lead to peace. It leads to an inner war, a slow erosion of authenticity. The rebel is often torn between two opposing forces, the fire of conviction and the weight of suffering. On one hand, their rebellion gives them meaning. They are driven by a cause, a vision of something greater than themselves. They may endure struggle, but at least they are alive, more alive than those who conform without question. On the other hand, this very fire can consume them. The world does not change easily, and fighting against it can lead to cynicism, exhaustion, or despair. Many rebels self-destruct under the weight of their own ideals. Some, like Van Gogh, are swallowed by madness. Others, like Ernesto Che Guevara, meet a violent end. But to ignore the rebel archetype altogether is to become passive, complacent, a prisoner of circumstances. The internal rebel is the force that tells you, this is not right, this system is flawed, this path is false. And if you refuse to listen, that voice does not disappear, it turns inward, becoming frustration, stagnation, even depression. To embrace the rebel archetype is to accept discomfort for the sake of growth. It is to recognize that suffering in pursuit of truth is preferable to comfort built on self-deception. Today's world has shifted. In the past, rebellion was visible. It was found in revolutions, uprisings, and radical movements. Now rebellion takes new forms. The modern rebel is not always on the battlefield. They might be the whistleblower exposing corruption, the artist challenging the mainstream, or the thinker rejecting societal programming. But true rebellion is harder than ever. Society has found ways to neutralize it, not through force but through distraction. The endless noise of entertainment, consumerism, and digital addiction numbs people into submission. Rebellion today is less about breaking physical chains and more about escaping the mental prison of modernity. This is why embracing the rebel archetype is more important than ever. The world does not need more blind followers, more passive consumers, more people who drift without purpose. It needs those who question, disrupt, and dare to create something different. The rebel archetype is not about reckless defiance. It is about awakening, about seeing past the illusion and choosing a path that is true rather than convenient. And so the question remains, is the price of rebellion worth it? For some, the answer is no. The burden is too heavy, the world too blind, but for others there is no other way. To live without questioning, without defying, without seeking truth, that to them is a fate worse than exile. To embrace the rebel archetype is not just to defy the world, it is to become fully alive. The rebel may walk alone, but their footsteps echo through eternity.